several years. Let's bring in the staff writer for The Atlantic, Tom Nichols. His latest piece titled Tulsi Gabbard's Nomination is a National Security Risk. Tom, good morning. Can you explain specifically why you believe she would be, if she gets this job, a risk to the country?
You know, every federal employee every year has to sit through insider threat training to recognize people they think might be hazards around classified material. And part of that is, people who are deeply critical of the United States and its foreign policy, who seem to have a lot of affinity and meetings with foreign nationals. I mean, there's all kinds of alarm bells that go off here. And this nomination sets them all off. This is, not somebody that you would say, sure, this, I'll hand the crown jewels of American intelligence to someone who, as you pointed out, leave aside that she's completely unqualified for the job. This is somebody who has consistently taken the side of people like Bashar Assad and Vladimir Putin, even when she was a member of Congress. There is absolutely no way that in any normal universe, we'd even be having this discussion about trusting Tulsi Gabbard with the American intelligence community. And a reminder to people watching, the DNI sits on top of all of America's intelligence communities, including CIA. And I think, one of the terrible things about the Matt Gaetz nomination is that it was so cartoonishly shocking that it's wiped out talking about how completely unfit Tulsi Gabbard is, and frankly, Pete Hegseth as well. I mean, you would have two people at Defense and DNI that I think you'd simply be shocked to think are handling classified information, or at least in Pete Hegseth's case, part of the nuclear chain of command. This is Donald Trump. In a way, he's trolling the nation, mocking. I think Reverend Sharpton had it right. He's mocking his own voters. But these are all focused inward. These are all about people who are going to punish Donald Trump's opponents merely by virtue of even being in the jobs. And there's no thought at all here about, well, I don't know, what's best for America or American national security or the defense of the republic.
Right. So, Jonathan Lemire, help me out here. You've obviously reported on President Trump now for quite some time. Let's look back over the past week. He received 50% plus in the vote tally that came in. He did. Swept the swing states. Did far better than anybody had expected as far as that big of a route. It was praised by, of course, Republicans. Got grudging respect from political pros on what he did. Certainly a lot of respect and adulation for Wall Street and business leaders, something that he certainly likes to hear. Laid out his first 2-3 picks that were met with I think a good enough reception. And so everything seemed to be breaking his way. And again, if you had a president who wanted to be a 50% plus president, he certainly had started off the first week very well in that direction. I'm curious, though, yesterday, one shockwave after another, obviously with Matt Gaetz, somebody who is not qualified to do the job and someone he knew would cause the reaction that it caused from Republicans and Democrats. Same thing with Tulsi Gabbard. I'm curious, your best reporting on why that sharp turn when everything seemed the first week to be going so smoothly.
People I've talked to around Trump in the last few days show this is a case study of these competing impulses he has. On one hand, yes, he wants to be liked. He wants to receive praise from the mainstream media, from Wall Street, from business leaders. At the same time, he gives into his darker instincts about revenge and retribution, and also siding with those who simply flatter him. It's about his agenda, too. We should fully anticipate business leaders pushing back against tariffs, let's say, or the mass deportations, because those things will impact the economy. Will that be enough to get him to stop? We shall see. He was praised for a lot of his early picks, including the official announcement yesterday of Marco Rubio to be Secretary of State. But beginning 2 nights ago with the Pete Hegseth pick and then really accelerating with Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard, this is him prioritizing personal loyalty and also retribution, which is what he has said this entire term would be about. And those around him, look, were taken by surprise, particularly by the Gaetz and Gabbard picks. They weren't on the short list, Gaetz included, and then they now wonder what happens next. It seems like a real dare to Republicans. Tom Nichols, I wanted to circle back to the Tulsi Gabbard selection with you, because one thing I heard yesterday, or concern I heard from those who are currently and formerly in the intelligence community, is that this would have a chilling effect on our allies, that because Gabbard is viewed with such suspicion, that there would be some of our European and Asian partners who might not want to fully cooperate with us, who frankly might have had some skepticism about Trump himself. Trump, of course, famously blabbed about intelligence to the Russian ambassador in the Oval Office. And now you add Gabbard to the mix. What's your degree of concern? Is this going to undermine our alliances?
My degree of concern about all three of these, and especially about Gabbard in that position, is off the charts a level of concern. Of course, it's going to affect our allies. They'd be, they would be irresponsible in their duties to their countries if they were not concerned about her, because when you're thinking about dealing with, again, the top American intelligence official, you take your pick. You wouldn't want to work with her because she's not qualified for her job, or because she's overly sympathetic to the president of Russia and the president of Syria, who, she seems to think is not our enemy, and is needs to be understood after he gassed his own people. There's also, I think, within the intelligence community, within the United States, you're going to see information slow down, simply because there are going to be offices and agencies where you're going to have intelligence professionals saying, what do I send up the chain? Where should this piece of information go? Do we keep it in-house at CIA or the FBI Tom, or National Security Agency? Tom, I mean, it's a mess.
Can I ask you, Tom? So let's say perhaps she's not, she doesn't get confirmed by the Senate. Who would be some other strong candidates for this position that might fit more into Donald Trump's worldview? So if not Gabbard's, and we've certainly heard from Republicans and Democrats alike, not her, but who would be 2 or 3 good names for this position if for some reason she got voted down?
Joe, I am not going to make the life of a future nominee difficult by naming them and saying that somebody I think would be okay.
How about describing the type of person that Republicans and Democrats would support? What would the qualities be?
The qualities would be, first of all, some experience with intelligence. I mean, this can't be amateur hour. This isn't The Apprentice. This isn't celebrity director of National Intelligence Week on the staffing apprentice to see if, the Hawaii National Guard Lieutenant Colonel can make it to the top of the intelligence heap. This is ridiculous. This is reality show approach. So you'd want somebody who has background in national intelligence, somebody perhaps, if it's a legislator, somebody who sat on those committees, if it's someone from within the intelligence community, someone who's managed a large organization. This is another thing we keep forgetting about these. One of the problems with both the Gabbard and Hegseth nominations is these are immense bureaucracies. They require people who are executives, who have run big organizations. So you'd look for that kind of background.
Right.
Gabbard has none of them.
Yeah.